Greetings! Welcome to Terra Prime Live, our weekly webcast on all things sabering. Joining me on the panel tonight is our Learners in Exile apprentices, Eric and Gary, or E-Rock and Count Arcanus. How you doing, gentlemen?
Very well, thanks, Master. On a computer where my mute button actually works tonight, so if I ask a question tonight, I will be answering promptly.
Very good. All right. Okay, and how are you doing, Gary?
I'm doing great, thank you, Master. My computer also seems to be behaving itself, which is good.
All right, yes. Well, we won't jinx it or anything like that. So we'll get right to it, guys. So yes, our mystery show. So what are we going to talk about tonight? One of the things we get into a lot of is practicality and you know, the kind of reality of all this kind of thing, and that's all part of it. I think a big part, though, of especially the Star Wars universe is a kind of mysticism and a kind of mystical underpinning to everything. And there's obviously some stuff that we can learn from that and glean from that, and it's obviously something that lots of us want to bring to this. We can go over the we'll be going over like the pitfalls and the benefits of both of these kinds of things and how they really kind of interact with each other. Contrasting these fantasy kind of realms of it and the more I hesitate to say it, real world examples of this type of stuff, and kind of go from there. So yes, so exactly what am I talking about mysticism and all of that kind of thing? Well, why don't we open it up to you guys? What do you guys think of when you think of mysticism on the panel?
Okay. When I think mysticism, I think I guess in popular culture anyway. I hearken to the old like back to the '80s with those dark magic rituals on those little cheap wooden altars with candles everywhere, black candles, and just kind of the stereotype. In reality, I think mysticism tends to generate, not always, but generally a facet of some type of belief or religious system, as far as I know, or as far as I've seen. Not always the case, though, but I think for just general population humans speaking, mysticism is somebody who devotes themselves very deeply to a spiritual belief. And what we do, I guess, the mysticism, I'm still learning it, but maybe for the Jedi, I guess, or Sith, I speak for the Jedi, of course.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, we'll get into that. I mean, that's obviously a large, a large piece of what's going in there. So, yeah, Gary, what do you think of when you think of mysticism?
I mean, I think you know, Eric's kind of onto something to some extent, because I mean, I see it as being trying to find meaning in things, perhaps. A sort of it's almost like I mean, the sort of the real world kind of approach is a very kind of nuts and bolts. This is how it works, you know, X, Y, and Z type of thing. I think mysticism is a more abstract thing to some extent. I mean, there are, there are elements of it where there are formula that you tend to follow. Yeah, a good example, ironically, what Eric said about, you know, cheap wooden altars and black candles. I mean, there's all the sort of paraphernalia that goes along with, you know, certain sort of views of mysticism, the candles, the, you know, the incense, the whatever it is. But I just think it's an attempt to tap into a wider view of things. I mean, a good example is you know, Ben Kenobi's admonition to Luke Skywalker about, having taken his first step into a larger world. I think it is basically a bigger way of looking at things, a more abstract and arcane way of looking at things, really. And yeah, I mean, I think it does come under belief and spirituality, really. In that, it's more the meanings behind things rather than the sort of nuts and bolts of just this is how they work. That's sort of my take on it, anyway.
Okay, interesting. The way I'm going to be using mysticism most of the time here is not going to be tied to religious belief. It's not going to be tied to even spiritual anything. The type of mysticism I'll be talking about here is this. Well, you touched on it both. This kind of feeling a part of a larger thing. Now, this is an abstract concept for things common to most human beings. I say most because I don't know all human beings. So the urge to solve mysteries, to look into things and find out what is happening, right? How do I relate to this? How is this, working together then to come out to here? I think we tend to put it into an ethereal thing because we try to separate, right, a kind of mystical view and a more practical view. But ultimately speaking, and I don't think this is a very controversial thing for any belief system, we're all talking about the same thing, right? Whether we call it reality, whether we call it objectivism, whether we call it materialism, whether we call it mysticism, whether we call it whatever, we're all describing the same phenomenon, right, with essentially the same equipment, right, that we are experiencing this stuff in. The thread of mysticism that can come is when you it's almost kind of like standing on the precipice of something. We have kind of mystical ideas of where things lead, and I think where we tend to have most of those are right on the edge of discoveries, right? Or just right on the edge of something. If you looking out to the sea, right? Just water as far as you can see, and you know how deep it goes, and it just looks forever. There's just water, and you know how deep it is, and it's just mind-boggling just to stand there, especially at night, right, where you see, even if it's just completely black, and all you can hear is the water, and you hear it rushing in, and you know that these tiny little waves that may be lapping at your feet are connected to this enormous thing that you cannot even, our brains can't really even comprehend the enormity of everything. We can kind of analogize it and put it into small little pieces so that we can chew them and think about them conceptually. But we can't really fathom, understand really how immense all of this stuff is. All we can really do is feel a kind of connection to it, right? The ocean's a good example. Lots of people feel a connection to the ocean. There's animal reasons for that. There are romantic reasons for that. There are personal reasons for that. All of these reasons exist, right? Okay. Hopefully, I won't drop out on anybody this time. Okay. So where I think mysticism and all of that kind of thing happens is within the cracks between the practicality, if you will, and however you want to kind of describe it, we're all going to be kind of describing that same thing, that same need for a connectedness, that same need for something else. And of course, how can we manipulate that to help us? And what are the ways that we can do that? You know, is it always harmful? Is it, you know, something like that? Because one thing you do have to understand is that when we're talking about mysticism and mystical things that fall within gray areas, whenever we tend to fall within gray areas, we become very, very susceptible to suggestion. So it's very difficult to sometimes discern even what you are thinking and what somebody is essentially making you think, right? Sometimes called manufactured consent. These types of things where it's just basically acting on little reactions in you, and so that the autonomic parts of you just kind of respond in that way, and you just kind of go along for the ride. So we do have to be careful about that, especially when we're applying it in real life. Mysticism has been used to control people, you know, subjugate people. There are lots of cults, all of this kind of thing. So be very, very, you know, wary about anybody, you know, selling this kind of stuff, because it's, you know, it's it's difficult to discern good from bad in these kinds of situations. I think that's one of the reasons why the Star Wars thing is very good, because it allows us to kind of exercise a lot of these inclinations that we have in ways that do not intrude into real life in ways like nationalism or religious animosity, or, you know, what have you, Christian versus Muslim, or this, that, the other, you know. So we kind of divorce ourselves from all that, and it's the same thing that we're talking about with the martial arts, you know, divorcing them from their kind of national and cultural identities and showing them simply in a technical standpoint. I think we can do that a lot, and we've talked about this philosophically, how this has been done philosophically through Star Wars. But I think people are having mystical experiences around these, you know, these ideas. The very the very thing that is, you know, kind of trying to unify all of that into one story is in reality kind of unifying a lot of the world in that very way. So yes, so we can kind of get down to it. I think one of the biggest things which will skate the line between mysticism and practicality is the idea that everything is in your mind, right? We have this concept, and I think it's fairly well known, of that reality is a construct of our brains. It's not real in the real sense in what we think of it as. The analogy of caves and all of that kind of thing. And this kind of it's something that people have thought for a very, very, very long time, from Taoists who say and Buddhists who say everything is an illusion, to you know, Christian mystics, Zoroastrians who are saying the same thing, Gnostics. You go throughout the history, you're going to find people who kind of go off on this particular tangent. So yeah, so that's obviously a very, very common theme. Do you guys want to say anything about that particular aspect of this at this juncture?
It's very well known that I kind of like this stuff, historical, like religious etymology, if you will, how religious ideas or belief systems were sort of passed from one culture to another, like through the Egyptians, Babylonians. It's pretty cool. First laws 5,000 years ago or whatever, more than that. Just the Code of Hammurabi, of course, I'm talking about. But yeah, how a lot of these stories just kind of trickled forward and had cultural modifications, if you will. And then but here
I'm
we are.
actually not talking about that. I'm talking about concepts which are not related and not culture, what Jung would have described as being part of the collective unconscious. The things that you can divorce from anything, like this type of thing. Because we've talked about mysticism, and why I'm separating it from religion is because you have religion, and you also have within the religion, you have a mystical sect of religion. I mean, in Judaism they call it Kabbalah. In some circles, Christianity has Gnostics and all kinds of other Christian mystical kind of mystical things. So if you look at anything like Mayans and Egyptians came up with very similar things, completely independently of each other, right? Just because these are the way kind of the way things work. Jung, that I just brought up, is a good example of somebody who kind of, studied this very thing. How is it that this happens? That you can have things happening almost parallel to each other, right? Separated by lots and lots of space. And obviously, the theory is that we are not that different from each other, right? And we operate and are existing within kind of the same sphere. I mean, of course, it's a sphere, our planet, but that we're not only sharing space and time, and all that kind of thing. There's all kinds of ways that you can look at how we exist with each other, and when you see that we have very, very common themes, right? Who invented war? Right? Who invented, who invented eating or cooking? That's not gonna be kind of centered there. And I think mysticism is the same way. So mysticism, I kind of think, is separate to that religion and cultural thing. That you can go to a Taoist and basically, say that concept that it's all in your mind, that you invent the reality around you. And you're going to find very few religions or mystics out there who are going to argue with that point, I would say. That now some people will tell you there are different limits to what you can do with that. That's where certain arguments will start. But I don't think that that's a particularly controversial idea, that we create our own reality. And I don't think it's religious. I don't even I think science backs that up. Everybody's experience backs that up. And perhaps what we're talking about is looking at those little pieces which are common through everything. Whether it be religious or not, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just jump in, I mean, you've actually just kind of said pretty much exactly the point I was going to make, was that throughout history you've got people from all over the world who, in a lot of instances, had no way of interacting with each other, who've kind of come up with the same ideas, the same sort of thoughts about how they work, how their environment works, and how the two interact. And as you were saying, I mean, it's you'll not get much disagreement from anybody about the idea that that you create your own reality, and you probably wouldn't get much of an argument either about the idea of being able to affect the reality of other people. And I think that sort of speaks to the point about how much control do you have and how far can you actually go with these things. Because that then gets into sort of questions of, well, how far is it right to actually go? If you are able to affect not only your reality but the reality of other people, you get into sort of almost moral questions of, well, is it right to do that? you know, especially if you find that you are able to do it. But it's common threads the world over, and you know, I think people will be debating for a long time why that is, whether it's just a kind of a shared human experience, because essentially we're all kind of, you know, a head, two arms, two legs, and a brain, or whether it's actually something that we're all tapping into, which is just the way it works.
Yeah, and here's the point: what what's the difference between those two things, right?
Well,
because if we are tapping in to just the way it works, then just the way it works is the way we work, and it's right back to that same concept, right? Of you know, but like you said, it's to the extent what can you do, right? First of all, right? If I go up and I say, here's a very common thing in the martial arts, the no touch knockouts, right? Being able to go boom and have people drop, right? Now, of course, you've seen it happen to people, right? And all of that kind of thing. There are varying degrees of criteria that need to be met before it works. One of these is that the person has to be at least subconsciously willing for it to work, or in some way invested in it working. And if you can get that across, excuse me, you can almost do anything, right? And that begs the question, which is the more powerful skill? The ability to knock somebody out without touching them, or the ability to fool somebody into thinking that you can knock them out without touching them? Right? And so you get into that whole Jedi mind trick. What is the Jedi mind trick? Right? And we can obviously play Jedi mind tricks on ourselves. Right? Anybody that's gone to the dentist probably has done this, you know, at some point. You know, think about something else, right? Or any type of unpleasant experience like that. Comments?
No.
Yes. Hopefully you heard that all.
I did, yeah. So it's like, oh my god, I really get through this time. That's awesome.
We're getting sound effects going here. All right. Well, so yeah, so now that's one thing that that is interesting. You know, force of will. We hear about it, like the Jedi mind trick, the mystical ability to control somebody's actions. There are actually a lot of ways that you can actually do that. People do it all the time. In fact, we all do it to a certain extent, right? We present ourselves in particular ways. We change the register of our speech. We dress up. We do things that aren't exactly us, so that we kind of try to, I don't know, coax a particular reaction out of somebody. We have to be careful, though, that we don't stray too far from what we really are, because at some point they are going to find that out. And if it's that disparate, they may not like the leap. So it's obviously a, you know, kind of thing. But a good example of the mind over matter type of thing is pain. We've talked about pain a lot here. Pain, as far as we can tell, is almost entirely a brain-based phenomenon. If you take the brain out of the equation, hence knocking them out, pain usually does not occur. Now we have nocioreceptors, which kind of sense perturbances and distortions in our, you know, in our tissues, right, and sometimes damage and all that kind of thing. But those activations don't always create pain. Now, sometimes they always do. We have pathways that we're born with. But to a certain extent, if we're not conscious to experience it, for our brain to be involved in the experience of pain, pain's not going to be there. That might seem kind of like a no-brainer, no pun intended, but the idea that you can be asleep and have things that would, like open heart surgery, right? That kind of thing. You know, if we can keep you asleep, you do not experience it, is a very kind of mystical thing. It's something. It's actually a phenomenon that's not well understood in science, in brain science. It's a very dangerous state to be in because more things happen because of anesthesia than even just operations. So the quest for these, for these anesthetic, safe anesthetics is very, very high. To the point where you can actually mix these mystical kind of things and anesthetics to come up with actually very, very effective things. Like, people have seen this. They've seen the acupuncture people getting brain surgery, right? And they're like, oh my God, because it looks, to us, it looks really, really painful. Now, on one hand, yeah, the act of doing that, and they're not really fully conscious when they're cutting and sawing and all that kind of thing. But even before they were using acupuncture, they would regularly do brain surgery while a person was conscious because they needed to make sure that they didn't destroy the person, by doing something. So that's how kind of we mapped out a lot of the brain and all that kind of thing. But you can see acupuncture being used to help alleviate some pain, so you can use less anesthetic. They're still using anesthetic, but they're using less of it. And whether it's the actual stimulation because of metal within the skin, or it's the placebo effect where the brain willfully goes that particular way. And that's another thing we're going to talk about here. Placebo effect gets a bad rap. Placebo effect is often considered to be like an insult, some kind of thing. But the placebo effect has been shown to be real, where you can literally fool somebody. You can trick them into getting better, depending on what it is. Obviously, we're dealing with that range again. Placebos against cancer, not great. Placebos against other things seem to do very, very well. But it's the same type of thing. We create our own reality. So I can give somebody a pill and say, this pill, if they believe what I'm saying, if I say it with enough confidence, if I have a number or a bunch of letters after my name, if they're paying me a whole lot of money, all of these things will allow, as we said before, will allow this person to be invested in it working, right? And so I can give that pill, and real change can happen. It depends on what it is. A lot of musculoskeletal stuff, the first and most important symptom is pain. And pain, as we said, is completely brain-based. People can take like something at a dilution, like a homeopathic remedy is at a dilution beyond even mattering, and the pain can go away long enough for them to kind of fix their mechanics in their knee, which will, if it's their knee, which will help it to heal, right? So even on these kind of tangents, you see a kind of real thing. And the mysticism of being able to do that, right, it brings up that point, like what you said, Gary. How far should you go? How much control, should you exert? Because quite frankly, if you know what you're doing, you exert an enormous force over other people, because most people go through life kind of on autopilot. And this is why this stuff kind of works. So, so that's the kind of thing. You guys have any comments or additions to any of that?
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, Eric. Sorry, Eric. I was dying to jump in on that one actually, because one thing as you were talking about that was really sort of ringing in my ears was the idea of even going more directly at it and using sort of hypnotism or sort of mesmerism, I suppose it used to be called, to take, in a sense, take over the reactions of another person with their, with their consent, obviously, but to take over those reactions so that you basically can say to them, "You will not feel pain," and you've got them into a state that is so relaxed and susceptible that you shut their brain off to it producing that pain reaction. And I'm pretty sure that's something that has been used and has been tried before, and with a fair degree of success.
Yes, yes, they did. They did some experiments. I believe it was in the 70s, where they would they could use hypnotic suggestion on susceptible people. And you got to remember that these experiments were just shown for people who they actually selected out to be susceptible, right? They found people. It was not like we see this in everybody. They're just basically it's a type of research where they look at the extreme of one end of the spectrum just so they can kind of get a gauge on where all of this is going to lie, kind of like an outskirt. So they looked at that, and people were able to like kind of raise blisters on their on their hands, and all that kind of stuff. Like they would tell them that this pencil was a hot piece of lead or something like that, and they would burn it, and you'd see the burn reaction, there and everything like that. And burns are a very good example of that because there isn't really a convincing or solid reason that I have heard to be accepted, by consensus of why burns hurt so much for so long. Right? They're not protective in that way. But like you said, you can get people into these susceptible states. You can bring yourself into those susceptible states. Meditation is something we kind of talk about here and there, and it's an interesting subject. What do you do to meditate? I hesitate to tell people what to do to meditate because it's we don't want to. I certainly don't want to get into that kind of weird state where what am I doing? Am I trying to am I feeding behaviors kind of surreptitiously or wherever? You can implant false memories in people. You can make people think that something happened that didn't happen. You can make people think that an object is something, right? They have to, at some point, be willing, and that's the key, right? But the problem is that so few people are really connected to who they are that they're not sure what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do, and they don't even really think about it, and so they kind of go around, and they do prey. They fall prey to this type of thing. Yeah, mesmerism was the old term for it because of Mesmer, but yeah, the hypnotism, which is more like a sleep state and all that. But it's not like in the movies where I can, and then you become like the Manchurian Candidate. That's not how it works. It doesn't even work that great for smoking, so it's not crazy effective. But in certain people, it is, and you can see that. The same thing with cults and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, absolutely. Hypnotism, self-hypnotism, the ability to fool oneself into thinking. So, haha, Nero, how's it going? We've got.
Oops. Hey, pretty good.
All right, glad you could join us. Yes, we were just talking about heady subjects like, what is reality and stuff. So, yeah. So yes, so you do have to be kind of careful about that. that not only can you kind of Jedi mind trick yourself, right, and you got to be careful how you do that, other people can do it to you if you're not cognizant of that kind of thing. So when you kind of get into this type of thing, be very, very wary of that. Meditation, taking a meditation class or anything like that. Be very, very wary of that. That you and you alone kind of create your own reality. So a lot of people kind of start out from that thing and then they'll change it down the line, almost so you don't notice. But if you want, a good example of mind over matter, we have a practice called just stance keeping, where we get into I'll show you here. I'll take this off. Just a stance is a kind of meditation. If I can get it here, I want to go kind of thing. We get low. I have no chair or anything like that, and then we'll just kind of hold a position like this. And you hold it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We go to 20, and that's about, diminishing returns. But what this does is it forces you to take control of your body. When you first start doing this, your legs start to shake uncontrollably. All kinds of weird stuff starts to happen. The pain is, as I say, for most guys, closest thing you're going to get to childbirth. Nowhere near it, closest thing you're going to do, right? Keeping this here, but really the hard thing is just not coming up, right? Just not standing up. And that's the trick, right? Anybody can do this. Anybody could stand here for days if they were forced to. People who were in POW camps were forced to, right? It's painful, it's arduous, it's horrible, right? But you can do it, and you can do it just by setting your mind to it. As I'm standing here, all I have to do is refuse to move, and I don't, right? If I stand up, if I let go, right? If I fall, anything like that, then I let myself do that. The shaking that comes is kind of like your muscles shutting on and off there. But the whole thing is just an exercise in discipline. I'm just standing here and I'm waiting, right? Obviously it has physical benefits. So that's not obviously that's the primary cause. But again, the discipline of it. Start with your hands down here, and I'll try to reach over and turn off my. There we go. There. Okay. So yes. So start with your hands kind of down here. Raise them up to here. And then the biggest challenge is holding them up like this. Okay, that's going to get more and more of the arm involved, right? Obviously, you're going to feel it in the thighs. Start with a depth of your choosing. Go for a certain amount of minutes. Do not go as long as you can and then get up, right? Because that's essentially teaching your body to give up. You pick a minute. Oh, hold it. And then get up, right? And then try to lengthen that by just adding time to it and not letting yourself stand up prematurely, if that makes any sense. Okay? So that's probably one of the best exercises to really get that. And it comes really from a very mystical standpoint of you're essentially forcing focus onto yourself by doing something that is so much an assault to your senses you cannot think about anything else, at least at first. Right? And anybody who's tried it, can attest to that. But again, it's all in your head. That ability to to just stand there and take it is essentially a choice. It's a choice that you may not have complete access to at all times, but it's still a choice.
Master, well, I was just reading in the Q&A here. Jeffrey Martinez, I totally second that, what you just said about what we're doing there with the horseback stance. It's brutal. But, wow, they talk about strengthening. But Jeffrey Martinez on the Q&A says, a lot of pain is memory, too. I've been told that's why I deal with chronic pain, and my body remembers being hurt. How would this work with chronic pain, especially, and people who have suffered accidents and trauma?
Well, chronic pain is obviously a very a very sticky issue. If I had an answer, I probably would be much wealthier. But being more active and just getting out there and doing stuff, and a practice like this, and I was down low because my computer is down here. If you start out, and you're only going to see my waist here, but if you just start out like right here, this is often where people start out. It will become hard enough, I guarantee you, just that much. Right? You don't have to go down to where you're like sitting on a child's stool or anything like that. But not only will it make your legs strong and everything like that, it makes your will strong. If you can do that, there is little in life that can really match that, right? And that you are able to subject yourself to it kind of propels us forward. And that's another way that we can kind of get a mystical kind of bent, and why mysticism is kind of tied to the Jedi, is tied to the Sith, is tied to all that kind of thing. I mean, if we're talking about a lightsaber, this is an instrument of science. It's a machine, right? But it is taken on, mystical connotations because of, how it's used, what it's used, and the stories behind it and everything like that. So it's obviously a very, very cool thing. So, taking mysticism and bringing all of that kind of stuff out, I think is very important in that context. But like even in competition, and we can ask Nero here, that it's so much of a match between anything, between two fighters, between two fencers, or anything like that, happens before the match, and oftentimes, people can see matches being decided before they even begin, right? Or at the first move, What would you say that's pretty true there?
Yeah, it's funny because it sounds almost cheesy, like it's something out of a movie. When you go to say that, you say, like, if you told anyone that doesn't really get it, that hey, sometimes it's decided before you even start, before you even pick up the weapon. It sounds like it's just something out of an old samurai movie or something, but it's actually pretty grounded in reality. It's 100% like. Obviously, anything you train in is going to be physical. Sport is going to be physical. Martial arts is going to be physical. But the thing is that competition, that aspect of it, you can train for it. I mean, certainly you're gonna work your ass off. You're gonna, kill yourself trying to train for it. But it's always going to be that mental state going into it, that level of confidence you have. That starting out on the right foot. I've started out on the wrong foot against people far, far, far below my level, and lost to them, and it shatters you, and then that carries on into further things. And believe me, I'm one of those people that, I'm pretty level-headed, I'm pretty easygoing in real life, but when I get on the strip, I can get wired up, and it gets into my head, and you can defeat yourself so easily. I mean, really, I tell people that, like, most of the battle is against yourself. Most people that, step up to the strip, I see them and I go, oh, they have the skills. They can beat this person easily, no problem. And then, whether or not they win, up in the air.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I can talk from personal experience that even your emotional state before any type of physical activity. When I was younger, it was tennis. When older, it was fighting, and then sword fighting, weapon fighting, all that kind of thing. And if I've had a bad day or anything like this, that always affects. And if you look at the crazy rituals that athletes have that go through before a big game, before a big match, before anything like that, and you can see true competitors know that it's all happening in here, right? You create that, and when people do win, that's when they're successful at doing that. And they always say that, I just saw it and I just wanted it, and to them that's all they did. That's all they did. Is there other forces working? Oh, there's tons and tons of other forces, but all they did was compete with themselves, right? And right there, that's what it is. Like you were saying, most of the fight, or most of the competition is with yourself, and can you do that? So.
Yeah, the first time I ever did the 5-minute challenge for the horseback stance. It's weird. I walked away going, it's almost like Neo in the first Matrix. It's like, I know what you're trying to do. That's what I thought when I finally got 5 minutes down. So it is possible.
Oh yeah, and see, I always tell people it would be really, really easy if I was standing there, right, with you, right, making sure you didn't stand up. If somebody else is kind of forcing you down there, it is a little bit easier, right? And then once you do it once, you can do it, whenever. And then that's how you start. You kind of layer it that way.
Yeah, there's like a mental discipline aspect that, I mean, obviously it starts before before any competition and then continues well into it. But it was something one of my coaches would always say, discipline, that kind of discipline is going to make the difference between, when the score's tied and you're, at the end of the line, that's what's going to win it. The person with discipline is going to win 9 times out of 10, whereas the other person, they can't handle the pressure, suddenly, they can't push through. The person who can just wipe the slate clean, go, I know what I need to do, and take it through, is what's going to do it for you. And that same thing, it relates exactly to the horse stance, everything. We did a lot of training like that too, and it's good for building not just the muscles. I mean, to me, it's almost the muscle part was almost secondary. I mean, of course it's important. It's almost it's great to build endurance and like we get on guard and we're in that the entire pretty much the entire bout. So obviously you need those muscles, but I always thought of the primary thing as being like building that mental discipline, just stick through it, like just keep that focus.
Yeah, definitely, and especially in a combat type sport, like what we do, sometimes they don't let up. Sometimes you don't get a breather, and you have to, as we say, dig deep, and you get those mystical experiences, and obviously the Force in Star Wars is the mystical gap thing, right? The Force, just throw the Force at it, right? And it's kind of kept very, very nebulous, probably for that very reason, right? Obviously, the Force is gender neutral. It's completely impersonal. All that kind of thing. That's how it started out. People got mad when it was to the midi-chlorians, that kind of thing. But if you really think about it, the midi-chlorians are just an intermediary step. They didn't really explain what the Force is, and actually nothing really explained what the Force is. They just keep talking about it in those weird nebulous terms. So it's one of these things that can exist and yet cannot exist. And those are the, like nothing, vacuum, right? Most of our universe is nothing. Just nothing. Not something, nothing. You know, and of course, that's not something that we can really imagine because we are set up to look at something. So we have to kind of reach into that mystical bag of tricks to sometimes to conceptualize a lot of this kind of stuff, whether it be for competition or just getting through the day, you know, any of that. It's all pretty much the same. Being able to overcome challenges like that becomes, you know, something of a mystical experience. Yeah, any of that kind of thing. Any questions, comments, anything like that? Take us in. Almost about 10 minutes left.
Yeah, it's funny because talking about this, it reminded me very strongly of Brian McCarthy, the ninjutsu guy, who I'm probably horribly misquoting here, but he had this idea that essentially competition against other people doesn't matter. He said the only competition is ultimately, you know, the game of life. He said, and it's the only, in a sense, the most difficult opponent you will ever face is yourself. And if you can overcome that opponent, then you know, any other opponent you might encounter will be a piece of cake, will be a complete walk in the park, because you've got control of yourself and you've beaten essentially your number one opponent. And so I mean, I think that is quite a sort of in some ways a kind of mystical view of things. It's, you know, dealing with what actually matters, which is controlling yourself, which is overcoming your own personal challenges. And then, you know, you're in a better position to deal with whatever else, you know, the world throws at you.
Yeah. I'll do you one better. I'll say that the only enemy you ever have, that you ever fight, is yourself. Because why do we choose certain fights over others? All right? It's because there's something that happened there that irked us, you know, that poked us in a particular spot. Right? It doesn't matter if it was intentional or not. Everybody reacts to those things, right? If you are aware of them, you're aware of that kind of thing, we can kind of get into it and try to control ourselves so we can, as we were talking just before, if we switch universes here and go over to Star Trek, we were talking about Vulcans and the idea that they're not just like incapable of emotion, they expunge themselves of emotion through discipline, through kind of a mystical practice, right? And although they are seated all over in that kind of thing, they're really just controlling the stuff that is undesirable to them, right? And we can all do that to actually a really, really great extent. And most people just don't. Either because they don't know they can, or they don't know how. But yeah, I think anybody that we go up against, if we want to fight them and we feel like we need to fight them, it's because we're fighting something in them that is us. We can see that shadow in them, and we want to kill it, right? Just like in and I think that was kind of the point of the Yoda arc in the finale of Clone Wars.
So, Master, we have another good comment here from the Q&A. Jeffrey Martinez says, do you think mysticism, do you see mysticism as a conversation between the conscious and the unconscious mind? By its very nature, the unconscious mind is a mystery.
A conversation between the conscious, maybe, but the thing is that our conscious mind and our unconscious mind are constantly talking to each other and constantly influencing each other. And actually, your unconscious mind is probably influencing you far more than your conscious mind is. I would hesitate going that way, because it seems to lead down to that thing where we kind of can give ourselves up to it, right? And you know, that seems, I don't know, that makes me uneasy. The self-discovery, the expanding oneself, as we said, is you know, probably more to what I'm leaning towards. All right, Gary, you got anything?
Yeah, I mean, on that, I mean, I think I agree with you. I mean, I think it's more where perhaps we should aim on a sort of personal level is understanding ourselves as a whole and having that sort of control over ourselves, and just really becoming kind of totally aware of what we are and who we are and our, you know, how we react, and rather than sort of concerning ourselves too much with, in a sense, a part of ourselves that we feel we can't see or we can't influence, and say, oh well, that reaction is kind of coming from there. I think if we get to a stage where we're sort of we're dealing with ourselves as a whole and everything that is in our makeup, both, you know, light and shadow, then, you know, I think that's a far better place to be, in all fairness.
Yeah, I would agree. Great. Master Nero, do you got anything to finish up here, or?
No, I pretty much said my part in sort of my experience with the whole aspect. It's definitely something that I think the issue is that no one really thinks of it that way. It's kind of a perspective type thing. People go into sports, they go into martial arts, and they don't like really just fully understand it. And it's not easy to get necessarily at first, but very important to get. It's the most important thing. You know, maybe, you know, it has the possibility to make you a lot better, but, you know, maybe it won't, but that's okay because you'll be better off for it, and you'll kind of have a fuller experience by realizing this sort of mystical, you know, with me it's all about, like you said, sort of facing yourself. That's always been something that I've been doing consistently throughout competition and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. When you go up against somebody, you kind of know that, and even when you're just kind of walking around, you get into less fights that way because you can kind of know, you kind of get up there, and you know, you can ask yourself, why do I want to hit this guy all of a sudden, or why do I really want to get in it, you know, into this? What is it there, you know? As long as you're thinking about that and you're making an informed decision, I don't think anybody really has, you know, can have an issue with it. Don't go around complaining that people don't like you, because you know, usually if you just speak your mind without editing, well, that can often go awry. But yeah, so, and it's not necessarily like we're saying, like you know, like, I mean, yes, Nero put it. It sounds like a chintzy little self-help kind of thing, that you are your greatest enemy and it's all in your head. But if you really look, I mean, look at mystical traditions in human history, and you look at the mystical traditions in sci-fi and fantasy and all of that kind of thing, they have that common thing. Even the creation of fiction has this thread of creating stories which teach us lessons, which connect us to other people, allow us to form communities, and have conversations and stuff like that. And that experience right there is probably the most mystical experience that we can experience here, you know, in this life at least. And if that's not mystical to you, I pity you, because I think it's pretty cool, especially nowadays with all communication we have. So, looks like we're coming down to the end of the hour here, so thank you all for joining us on the interwebs and wherever you may be. If you're watching this after the fact, great. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you to our panel for dropping by, chiming in on this one. I believe we're going to be taking a week off again next week, and then there, because I will be doing camp all next week. So that's our first lightsaber camp. So here we go, haha, and so we'll do that. But we'll see what happens after that. So make sure you tune in to our Facebook page, web page, all that. See us on the forums. Other than that, have a great weekend, everybody. May the Force be with you, and happy sabering.